First day of G7 summit talks underway in Kananaskis, Alberta. One of the important topics at that summit, of course, is trade relationships with the imposition of hefty American tariffs on most countries. For more insight, we'll go to Clifford Sosnow. He's an international trade lawyer with Fasken law firm in Ottawa. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Dominic LeBlanc says he's confident they've made some progress, which sounds positive, but can you bank on that?
I think they are making progress. I think President Trump has signaled that he's willing to do some kind of a deal with Canada. What that deal looks like, of course, is anybody's guess at this stage of the game. He's made it very clear that he wants something that will deal with tariffs. And he said he's wed to tariffs, but that Prime Minister Carney is not. So you can already see the default lines, and so much is in the detail. But at this stage of the game, the optics, the body language, the using of a pin with two flags on it, all of those things seem positive.
What do you think has changed in Donald Trump's mind since he initially introduced tariffs and came out strongly against the auto sector, steel and aluminum, which are still facing hefty tariffs, but generally he had set a tone with Canada that was much harder, that has turned now, as you say, to be a little bit softer?
Well, he's starting to work out deals. He's a transactional kind of president, and he's starting to develop transactions with China. He's developing transactions with the UK. He's talking about developing a deal with the EU, and now he's talking about developing a deal with Canada. You'll recall that when he had his Liberation Day, the markets tanked. There was an enormous amount of negative pushback, both within the United States and outside the United States. It seems relatively clear that a lot of what he's been doing up to date is creating the kind of conditions, the criteria that in his mind are needed to get that transaction. And I think he's using that now, and he thinks that the politics are such that it makes sense to have that engagement with Canada.
So Trump says not so much standing in the way of a Canada-U.S. trade deal. What do you see as still standing in the way?
Well, I think when he's talking about standing in the way, he's saying, look, I'm ready to deal, and I feel comfortable dealing with Canada, and Prime Minister Carney is saying, yeah, I'm ready to deal, and I'm looking for having a deal. The issue is tariffs, and he said it's tariffs, and the question then becomes, what is included in? And how are those tariff issues addressed, and how are they dealt with? Steel and aluminum is a very big deal for the president. Autos is a very big deal for the president. China is a very big deal for the president. If those three things can be addressed in some kind of a deal, then I think we have significant progress in moving towards the deal. I think it's all important, though, for everybody to recall that we do already have a trade agreement with the United States. It's called the CUSMA. The United States calls it the USMCA, and Mexico calls it the TMAC. And that's unlike any other country with whom the president is negotiating. So this is kind of an add-on to what exists already. The president has indicated that he wants to walk away from the trade agreement that already has with Canada and Mexico. And the sleeper piece in all of this is, where is Mexico? Is this going to be a purely bilateral relationship? Is it going to involve Mexico? Mexico has been invited to the table, and they're a question mark for resolving some of these issues like steel and aluminum and autos. Where
can you see Canada offering some compromise? We've seen Mark Carney already say we're going to invest in defense heavily. We're going to meet that 2% NATO mark by the end of the fiscal year. So a lot of money going there. We've seen Canada put duties on Chinese EVs coming into the country, which was to match the U.S. That was, of course, before Carney came into office. Where do you see compromise from Ottawa?
Well, the president is very concerned about what he calls unfair trade practices from countries that are non-market economies, in parentheses, think China, but there's other countries as well. And as you know, Canada has tariffs against China on steel and aluminum. There clearly is some kind of asymmetry of interest between the United States and Canada as it deals with steel and aluminum and China, although China likely would not be mentioned. So there are some gifts that the Prime Minister can provide to the President that would satisfy the President, that also aligns with where Canada is going right now in terms of protecting Canadian workers against unfair trade practices. In terms of autos, it's possible that the Prime Minister can work out some kind of a deal. What that deal would likely be would be a Fortress North America with very, very stringent rules in terms of the amount of content, for example, U.S. content. That would need to go into the United States duty-free. He's already made that as a concern for himself. It's possible that there might be some give by the Prime Minister without selling out the auto industry in Canada. Also, the critical minerals piece, that's a larger piece. The president has said, I'm very, very interested in critical minerals. I'm very interested in energy. It is likely that there could be some synergies of interest, perhaps maybe rights of first refusal with respect to investments in critical minerals and energy. So there's at least 3 areas that would advance the Prime Minister's agenda that would be very interesting to the president. I guess I could put a 4th one in, which is steel and aluminum. The president has in 2018 accepted a deal on steel and aluminum, where you'll recall that he did impose tariffs on Canada and then said, I'll remove them if you have some volume limitations into the country. It is possible that he could dust that off and say, are you prepared to accept that? And if the Prime Minister says yes, and if the volume is sufficiently high, then both sides can declare a win.
We know that China controls critical minerals, rare earth. That's been a sore spot for Donald Trump. He wanted that. There have already been some shortages in the U.S. He wanted that route opened up with China again. Could you see the U.S. partnering on Ontario's Ring of Fire? And do you think Ottawa would allow that?
I think Ottawa is prepared to do that. I think that Ontario is prepared to do that. As I say, there has been discussions about a right of first refusal. It depends on what that would look like. It would depend on what the asking price is. Clearly, Canada is looking to develop that critical mineral space. The world is moving towards a high demand of critical minerals. We're starting to see that. And there's starting to be a geopolitical element to it that's really becoming amplified, as you're seeing in the deal between China and the United States that addresses critical minerals. So anything that can be done to favor U.S. involvement in the critical minerals piece would be viewed as a positive by the president. You recall in his early days, he issued an executive order where he said, critical minerals is important to me. And if the Prime Minister can develop that, Prime Minister, recall, is talking about national projects. Critical minerals has that national geocritical strategic element to it. So again, you could see a win-win there.